Question 281. Midway through development, a senior user casually requests adding a small feature, exporting reports to Excel. They say, "It's just a quick add, shouldn't take more than an hour." The team warns it affects API changes and validation logic. No formal discussion happened, and the requirement was not in the baseline. How should you prevent scope creep? Here's my answer and why. Explain the impact, redirect the request into the formal change control process, and document the evaluation before deciding whether to include it. In my opinion, this is the best option because ensures discipline and visibility in change management, prevents informal additions masquerading as small changes, protects timeline and quality through proper impact analysis, better than accepting the request informally or rejecting it without structure. Preventing scope creep requires routing all new requests through a structured change process, even when they appear small. This ensures visibility, proper analysis, and balanced trade-offs, maintaining predictability in delivery. Question 282. During sprint reviews, a stakeholder keeps suggesting quick UI enhancements that were never part of the design approval. They pressure the team by saying, "Let's just fit this in, it's minor." The team feels obligated, but overwhelmed. How should you stop this creep? Here's my answer and why. Reinforce the approved design baseline, explain capacity constraints, and ask the stakeholder to log enhancements in the backlog for proper prioritization. In my opinion, this is the best option because protects team capacity, uses backlog discipline to manage new ideas, keeps the design scope stable, better than accepting ad hoc feature injections. Maintaining a structured backlog ensures enhancements are prioritized transparently rather than sneaking into active work, which is the essence of preventing incremental scope creep. Question 283. Your marketing team insists that a new compliance disclaimer must be added immediately, but this requirement was not part of the signed-off MVP. They have not provided any documentation or legal validation yet. How should you prevent scope creep while still being responsive? Here's my answer and why. Request formal documentation and send the requirement through the defined change assessment process before committing to inclusion. In my opinion, this is the best option because ensures legal accuracy, prevents undocumented claims becoming scope drivers, maintains baseline integrity, better than reacting to verbal pressure. Scope discipline means ensuring all new requirements, especially compliance-related, go through documented impact analysis instead of relying on informal urgency. Question 284. The product owner wants to add just one more feature to make the release more impressive, even though release scope was already baselined due to regulatory deadlines. The team fears this will jeopardize compliance. How should you respond? Here's my answer and why. Explain the risk to mandatory deadlines and reinforce that any new feature must follow change control, then recommend deferring the request to a future release. In my opinion, this is the best option because protects regulatory commitments, maintains scope discipline, offers a constructive future pathway, better than accepting risky last-minute changes. Scope creep must be controlled, especially during regulatory deliverables. Deferring new ideas while respecting the formal process keeps both compliance and relationships intact. Question 285. A department head casually asks your engineers for a little automation script to help them with reporting. The engineers start working on it, assuming it's minor. You discover this only after noticing delays in the sprint. How should you prevent this from continuing? Here's my answer and why. Stop the unapproved work, reinforce that all requests must go through the project intake process, and realign the team on sprint scope discipline. In my opinion, this is the best option because reasserts boundary control, prevents hidden scope diversions, aligns team behavior with process. Better than allowing one-off favors. Preventing team-level scope creep requires reinforcing intake boundaries and ensuring all work flows through transparent prioritization and commitment channels. Question 286. Your sponsor asks you to just include an additional reporting dashboard because leadership may ask for it during the review. It is not part of the baseline and requires significant UI and back-end effort. The sponsor insists it's essential for optics. How do you prevent scope creep? Here's my answer and why. Explain the impact on schedule and resources, walk the sponsor through trade-offs, and route the request through formal change evaluation. In my opinion, this is the best option because makes scope risk implications explicit, protects team commitments, maintains governance discipline, better than giving in to optics-based pressure. Sponsors often push for additional features under political pressure, but proper change governance ensures predictability and stops reactive scope growth. Question 287. A technical architect wants to add an optimization that will make the system more elegant. While valuable long-term, it requires rewriting a stable component and is outside the project scope. The team is excited, but it threatens deadlines. How do you prevent this form of technical scope creep? Here's my answer and why. Thank them for the idea. Reinforce current delivery priorities and place the optimization in a backlog or tech debt register for future consideration. In my opinion, this is the best option because balances innovation with discipline, prevents uncontrolled technical expansion, maintains timeline, better than shutting down the architect or implementing immediately. Technical scope creep is subtle but significant. Parking ideas transparently maintains discipline while still valuing architectural improvement. Question 288. The client expects the team to adjust as they go, frequently asking for changes during demos. The contract is fixed scope. The client claims these changes are clarifications, not new scope. How do you maintain scope control? Here's my answer and why. Document each request, differentiate clarifications from new requirements using the scope baseline, and route any true changes through a controlled approval process. In my opinion, this is the best option because keeps contractual boundaries clear, prevents the client from masking scope changes as clarifications, ensures mutual accountability, better than allowing fluid verbal additions. Clarifications and new requirements must be differentiated clearly to uphold fixed scope contracts and prevent disguised scope creep. Question 289. An influential user claims the original scope obviously included multiple integrations, even though discovery notes clearly excluded them. They push hard to include the integrations without going through governance. How should you handle this? Here's my answer and why. Review the documented scope with them, highlight exclusions, and guide them to submit a formal change request for prioritization and impact assessment. In my opinion, this is the best option because uses documentation to reset expectations, protects scope boundaries, ensures impacts are evaluated, better than debating assumptions verbally. Scope must be anchored in documented agreements, not assumptions. Redirecting the user into the change process upholds alignment and fairness. Question 290. You notice that the team is voluntarily adding value improvements without informing you, believing these enhancements don't really affect scope, but these additions cumulatively increase effort and test coverage. How should you correct this behavior? Here's my answer and why. Reinforce scope boundaries. Remind the team that even beneficial enhancements require visibility and approval, and establish a backlog channel for proposing value improvements. In my opinion, this is the best option because prevents hidden work, keeps effort predictable, encourages structured idea flow, better than shutting down improvement entirely. Even positive improvements can become scope creep when uncontrolled. A structured idea channel preserves innovation while protecting planning accuracy. Question 291. During development, a business analyst submits new requirements directly to developers, calling them urgent refinements. These requirements were never reviewed, approved, or evaluated. The developers have already started implementing them. How should you respond? Here's my answer and why. Stop the unapproved work immediately. Review the new requirements through the formal approval and impact assessment process, and reinforce requirement intake discipline with both the BA and team. In my opinion, this is the best option because prevents uncontrolled requirement injection, ensures proper impact analysis before committing, protects sprint plan integrity, better than allowing BA-driven shortcuts or scolding the team afterward. Unapproved requirements must be stopped immediately and redirected into the formal intake process. This prevents chaotic scope expansion and reinforces predictable delivery behavior. Question 292. A senior user keeps sending must-have feature ideas over email, copying leadership to create pressure. None of these requirements are in the signed-off scope, and evaluating them now would delay critical milestones. How should you handle this? Here's my answer, and why. Acknowledge the suggestions, clarify that all new requirements must go through change governance, and schedule a formal review session to evaluate impact and priority. In my opinion, this is the best option because shows respect while upholding process, prevents pressure-based inclusion of unapproved scope, ensures proper analysis with all stakeholders. Better than ignoring or reacting defensively to emails. Pressure-driven requirement injection must be redirected into structured evaluation. This demonstrates professionalism while safeguarding the delivery plan. Question 293. During UAT, testers raised several expected behaviors that were never part of the documented requirements. They claim these were understood from earlier conversations. These expectations would require major redesign. What should you do? Here's my answer and why. Review the original requirements, clarify what was officially approved, and channel any new expectations into a structured change request with full impact analysis. In my opinion, this is the best option because resets expectations using validated documentation, prevents late-stage redesign without approval, creates an official path for needed enhancements, better than accepting subjective, understood expectations. UAT is a common source of assumed requirements. Using documentation to realign expectations and routing new needs into controlled change management prevents chaos. Question. Engineers begin adding extra validations they believe will improve user safety, even though these were not specified. These validations introduce new error flows requiring additional UI changes. How should you manage this? Here's my answer and why. Stop the unapproved enhancements, review the impact, and place the validations into a change evaluation or future enhancement backlog. In my opinion, this is the best option because reinforces requirement ownership and discipline, prevents hidden work from growing, supports structured improvement while controlling scope, better than allowing developer-driven enhancements. Unapproved improvements must be paused and routed through proper evaluation to prevent technical scope creep while still valuing innovation. Question 295. A VP insists that a new reporting feature was always part of the plan, even though project documentation, baseline, and meeting notes show no reference to it. They demand its inclusion for the next release. What should you do? Here's my answer and why. Respectfully walk through the signed-off documentation, clarify that the feature was not approved, and offer to evaluate it formally via the change control process. In my opinion, this is the best option because uses documentation to depersonalize the discussion, protects delivery integrity, offers a constructive path forward. Better than challenging the V directly or quietly adding the work. Documentation is a neutral alignment tool. Redirecting senior assumptions into formal evaluation avoids conflict while preserving scope discipline. Question 296. A customer representative asks the QA team to test additional scenarios not in the requirements, claiming these are common cases. Testing these would require new development and additional scripting. What should you do? Here's my answer and why. Clarify that additional test coverage must match approved requirements, and route any new scenarios through requirement review and change control. In my opinion, this is the best option because aligns testing with documented scope, prevents hidden requirement growth via QA, protects testing effort from uncontrolled expansion, better than treating customer assumptions as requirements. Testing must map to approved requirements. Any new scenario, even if reasonable, must follow the same approval rigor to avoid creeping scope via QA. Question 297. The UX designer presents an expanded prototype, including several new flows not in the original scope. They argue that the additional flows complete the user experience. Implementing them would significantly extend development time. How should you respond? Here's my answer and why. Appreciate the improved vision, compare it against the approved requirements, and route new flows through formal change evaluation before considering inclusion. In my opinion, this is the best option because protects schedule and development capacity, respects UX insights while keeping scope under control, provides structured evaluation, better than accepting design-driven expansion. Design innovations are valuable but must be evaluated formally. Requirements, not design ambition, define scope boundaries. Question 298. The client verbally approves a new enhancement in a call, but refuses to document it or go through approval channels. Later, they claim it was already agreed. This pattern is recurring. How should you manage this? Here's my answer and why. Document the verbal request yourself. Email summary. Restate that formal written approval is required before work begins, and escalate only if the client repeatedly bypasses approval. In my opinion, this is the best option because creates traceability, protects against future disputes, encourages compliance with approval workflow, better than accepting undocumented commitments. Verbal approvals are risky. Summarizing them in writing and requiring formal approval protects the project from evolving interpretations. Question 299. Your product owner adds several items to the sprint backlog without consulting the team, claiming they are small enhancements. The team is already at capacity. These were not part of planning or estimation. What should you do? Here's my answer and why. Remind the product owner that sprint goals and commitments should not change without team agreement, and redirect unapproved items to the backlog for future prioritization. In my opinion, this is the best option because reinforces sprint integrity, maintains predictable delivery, protects team capacity. Better than letting the PO override planning discipline. Sprints must protect commitment stability. Even minor enhancements require alignment with both the team and the process. Question 300. Several requirements begin emerging informally during daily stand-ups. Team members mention customer comments, personal ideas, or assumptions as things we should probably include. These are not validated requirements, but the list keeps growing. What should you do? Here's my answer and why. Clarify that only approved requirements form the baseline, create a clear funnel for requirement intake, and direct all new ideas into a structured review process. In my opinion, this is the best option because prevents stand-ups from generating unofficial scope, reinforces boundaries between ideas and requirements, establishes discipline in intake and review. Better than addressing each idea ad hoc. Teams often unintentionally generate scope creep through informal idea sharing. A structured funnel protects the requirement baseline while still encouraging creativity. Question 301. A requirement states, the system should load quickly. Neither the stakeholder nor the BA can define what quickly means. The developers are unsure what performance target to design for. How should you proceed? Here's my answer and why. Facilitate a discussion to define measurable performance criteria, e.g., specific response times, and document the clarified requirement for approval. In my opinion, this is the best option because converts vague language into measurable acceptance criteria, prevents rework and misaligned expectations, ensures developers design to a concrete target, better than guessing or accepting ambiguity. Ambiguous performance statements must be translated into measurable criteria early. This aligns stakeholders, prevents rework, and supports realistic design choices. Question 302. A requirement says, provide a dashboard with user insights. During discussions, different stakeholders interpret insights differently. Some want analytics, others want usage trends, while another group expects AI recommendations. How should you clarify this ambiguity? Here's my answer and why. Run a requirement clarification workshop to define what insights specifically include, capture differences, and drive the group to an agreed detailed definition. In my opinion, this is the best option because prevents competing interpretations, enables shared understanding, aligns scope and effort, better than piecemeal discussions. Ambiguity across stakeholders requires facilitated alignment, not isolated conversations. Consolidated definition prevents fragmented expectations later. Question 303. A requirement states, the system must support high volume of concurrent users. When asked for numbers, the stakeholder says, just make it scalable. This level of ambiguity affects architecture decisions. What should you do? Here's my answer and why. Ask for specific concurrency metrics and usage projections, and document them as measurable non-functional requirements before architecture decisions are finalized. In my opinion, this is the best option because prevents inappropriate architecture sizing, ensures design aligns with actual business needs, avoids costly overbuilding or underbuilding. Better than accepting vague scalability terms. Scalability must be defined quantitatively. Ambiguous statements lead to architecture misalignment unless translated into clear, non-functional requirements. Question 304. A requirement says, enable secure access for users. The security team interprets this as MFA, product expects normal login, and legal expects audit tracking. How do you remove this ambiguity? Here's my answer and why. Bring security, product, and legal stakeholders together to define what secure access includes and document a final, unified requirement. In my opinion, this is the best option because aligns cross-functional expectations, prevents conflicting interpretations, ensures clarity before development begins, better than selecting one group's interpretation. Ambiguity in cross-functional requirements demands joint alignment, ensuring the solution meets security, compliance, and business expectations together. Question 305. A requirement states, the system should be easy to use. Different stakeholders have different opinions on what easy means: fewer clicks, simplified screens, automated steps, etc. The team is confused on how to proceed. What should you do? Here's my answer and why. Define usability criteria jointly with stakeholders, such as number of steps, click limits, workflow expectations, and document these as acceptance criteria. In my opinion, this is the best option because converts vague usability statements into measurable definitions, aligns design and development, prevents subjective disagreements later, better than personal interpretation of easy. Usability must be translated into quantifiable acceptance criteria. This aligns stakeholders, UX, and developers to a shared definition of easy. Question 306. You receive a requirement that says the system should support reporting. The stakeholder cannot specify what reports, what fields, what filters, or who the users are. How do you proceed without allowing ambiguity to propagate? Here's my answer and why. Facilitate detailed requirement elicitation to identify report types, users, filters, fields, and frequency, and document the clarified scope for approval. In my opinion, this is the best option because reduces uncertainty, prevents misaligned report design, provides concrete development inputs, better than starting with vague placeholders. Ambiguous reporting requirements require structured elicitation to avoid massive misalignment and scope ballooning during development. Question 307. A requirement says, provide user notifications. Some stakeholders expect emails, others push notifications, others SMS. The engineering team wants clarity before designing the notification system. What do you do? Here's my answer and why. Gather all stakeholders to define notification channels, triggers, frequency, and user preferences, and convert them into detailed functional requirements. In my opinion, this is the best option because prevents fragmented interpretations, supports accurate architectural planning, reduces redesign risk, better than letting each group define their own interpretation. Clarifying notification requirements through multi-stakeholder alignment ensures consistent expectations and avoids costly redesigns. Question 308. A vague requirement says, optimize system performance. The stakeholder cannot articulate what must improve: CPU usage, memory, load time, throughput, etc. The engineering team needs clarity before optimization. What should you do? Here's my answer and why. Break down performance expectations with stakeholders. Identify measurable KPIs, e.g., response time, load capacity, and update the requirement with clear targets. In my opinion, this is the best option because creates measurable improvement goals, prevents arbitrary optimization, guides engineering prioritization, better than vague optimization. Requests, performance improvements must be tied to measurable KPIs, so engineering effort targets the areas stakeholders truly value. Question 309. A requirement says, improve customer experience. Some stakeholders want chatbot help, others want simpler workflows, others want personalization. Without clarity, the team cannot design a coherent solution. What should you do? Here's my answer and why. Conduct a structured discovery session to define specific experience outcomes, prioritize them, and convert them into actionable, testable requirements. In my opinion, this is the best option because avoids subjective interpretation, creates actionable design direction, aligns all stakeholders, better than trying to address all ideas simultaneously. Customer experience must be decomposed into specific outcomes. Discovery and prioritization prevent scattered, unfocused development. Question 310. A requirement says the interface should be modern. Stakeholders cannot agree on what modern means. Minimalist design, dark mode animations, or updated icons. How should you eliminate this ambiguity? Here's my answer and why. Define modern collaboratively by reviewing examples, identifying specific elements, e.g., flat design, color themes, animations, and documenting clear UI acceptance criteria. In my opinion, this is the best option because converts subjective design terms into objective criteria, guides UI UX teams effectively, reduces rework caused by mismatched visual expectations, better than letting design teams interpret freely. Subjective UI terms must be converted into specific design criteria. Collaborative clarification ensures shared visual expectations and minimizes redesign cycles. Question 311. During requirement discussions, the business team insists that a particular workflow is simple, but developers warn that it requires a complex data transformation and integration. Both sides believe they are correct, and discussions are becoming tense. What should you do to align understanding? Here's my answer and why. Facilitate a joint session where developers walk the business team through the technical workflow and constraints, while the business team explains the functional intent, ensuring both sides align on complexity and expectations. In my opinion, this is the best option because creates shared visibility into business intent and technical reality, reduces tension by grounding conversation in facts, enables informed prioritization and decisions, better than letting each side defend their assumptions. Business tech alignment happens best through facilitated, interactive conversations. When both sides understand each other's constraints and intentions, decisions improve and conflict reduces. Question 312. The business team has defined a feature that assumes real-time data availability. However, the technical team explains that one of the core systems only supports batch updates every 6 hours. The business team insists real-time is mandatory. How should you align both sides? Here's my answer and why. Facilitate a trade-off discussion highlighting feasibility, cost, architecture limitations, and alternative solutions, e.g., near real-time or cached views, ensuring the business makes an informed decision. In my opinion, this is the best option because converts conflict into informed decision-making, provides clarity on technical constraints, evaluates alternatives rather than a binary yes-no, better than forcing one side to concede. Business wants outcomes. Engineering knows constraints. Trade-off discussions bridge the two, enabling informed prioritization without undermining trust. Question 313. The business team requests a one-click workflow. Engineers explain that certain validations legally require multiple confirmation steps. Both groups are stuck. How should you facilitate alignment? Here's my answer and why. Bring compliance, engineering, and business together to explore legal constraints, user experience needs, and acceptable design alternatives that meet all requirements. In my opinion, this is the best option because integrates all constraints, legal, UX, tech, avoids oversimplifying or overcomplicating, enables compliant yet user-friendly solutions, better than isolating conversations to just business versus engineering. Legal UX technical alignment is essential when constraints conflict. A collaborative triad discussion yields safe and practical solutions. Question 314. The technical team says a feature will take 3 months due to complex back-end integration, but business leadership believes it should be a small update. They accuse the team of inflating timelines. How should you handle this? Here's my answer and why. Host a walkthrough where developers explain the integration points, dependencies, and constraints in plain business language, ensuring leadership understands the true effort. In my opinion, this is the best option because reduces perceived exaggeration, builds transparency and trust, allows leadership to make informed priority decisions, better than defending the estimate without clarity. When business questions technical effort, transparent walkthroughs build credibility and enable prioritization based on clear understanding. Question 315. Developers propose storing certain data in cache to improve performance. Business insists this data must always be 100% real-time accurate, even though the accuracy difference is only a few milliseconds. Both sides have strong opinions. What is your next step? Here's my answer and why. Facilitate a discussion to review performance gains, data accuracy needs, acceptable data latency, and decide collaboratively whether cash meets the actual business risk profile. In my opinion, this is the best option because aligns accuracy expectations with performance trade-offs, decisions grounded in quantified impact, avoids emotional disagreement, better than letting either side impose a unilateral view. Data accuracy versus performance is a classic business tech alignment challenge. Joint discussions reveal the acceptable middle ground based on risk and value. Question 316. Business wants a feature delivered within the quarter. Technical teams state that the required system upgrade will take 6 to 8 weeks alone. Business believes the upgrade is optional. Misalignment is growing. How do you resolve this? Here's my answer and why. Share a dependency map showing why the upgrade is required, review options with business, and align on sequencing, trade-offs, and realistic timelines. In my opinion, this is the best option because makes dependencies visible, enables decision-making grounded in reality, prevents misaligned expectations, better than insisting on either timeline. Dependencies must be made explicit to align expectations. When business sees technical constraints clearly, timelines become collaborative decisions rather than disagreements. Question 317. A senior executive demands an immediate workaround for a data issue affecting reporting. Engineering explains that a workaround may corrupt data integrity long term. The executive insists it's fine because we need numbers now. How do you align understanding? Here's my answer and why. Explain the long-term risks of data corruption and propose alternative short-term visibility options, e.g. temporary manual extracts, while engineering prepares a safe fix. In my opinion, this is the best option because balances urgency and data integrity, translates technical risk into business impact, offers viable alternatives rather than rejecting the request. Better than blindly executing the workaround. Aligning urgency with risk requires reframing technical concerns in business language and proposing alternatives rather than forcing a binary decision. Question 318. A requirement assumes a single customer view, but engineering reveals that customer data lives in 4 separate systems with inconsistent identifiers. Business insists the view is essential for launch. How should you align both sides? Here's my answer and why. Facilitate a joint session to review data fragmentation, explore feasible approaches, matching rules, phased integration, manual reconciliation, and agree on what level of single view is realistic for the release. In my opinion, this is the best option because turns unrealistic expectations into achievable scope, builds shared understanding of data constraints, supports phased delivery if needed. Better than agreeing blindly or rejecting outright. Realistic alignment on fragmented data systems requires educating business teams and co-designing feasible solutions, rather than allowing unrealistic assumptions to drive scope. Question 319. Business wants to support multiple currencies immediately. Engineering explains that currency conversion requires deep changes to pricing logic, databases, and reporting. Business insists that adding currencies is just adding fields. How do you align understanding? Here's my answer and why. Organize a walkthrough showing where pricing logic, taxation, FX rates, and reconciliation are impacted, enabling business to understand true complexity and decide sequencing. In my opinion, this is the best option because makes invisible technical impacts visible, enables informed prioritization, reduces frustration on both sides, better than countering with abstract explanations. Visual walkthroughs bridge technical business understanding gaps by revealing hidden complexity in a non-confrontational, informative way. Question 320. Business expects a feature to be available globally, but engineering explains that data localization laws in several countries require different storage and processing. Business argues that global is global. How do you align understanding? Here's my answer and why. Explain data localization impacts in simple terms, review legal obligations by jurisdiction, and agree on a phased or region-specific rollout that respects compliance. In my opinion, this is the best option because aligns legal, technical, and strategic realities, prevents compliance violations, supports structured rollout planning, better than forcing uniform global delivery. Global features must consider regional regulation. Transparent explanation and phased alignment help business see realistic paths without compromising compliance. Question 321. During development, a developer adds a minor UI improvement that changes button placement. QA reports that workflows now behave differently. The developer insists it's a harmless enhancement and took only 30 minutes. How should you handle this hidden change? Here's my answer and why. Pause the change, assess its functional and UX impact, and require all enhancements, regardless of size, to go through the standard requirement review and approval process. In my opinion, this is the best option because prevents hidden changes from creating unintended behavior, ensures UX consistency and cross-team alignment, reinforces change control discipline better than normalizing informal enhancements. Even small changes can disrupt behavior and testing. Enforcing proper intake for all changes maintains quality and avoids unintended consequences. Question 322. The product owner casually asks a developer during a hallway conversation to slightly tweak a validation rule. The developer implements it, but QA later identifies major downstream effects. What should you do? Here's my answer and why. Reinforce that all requirement changes, no matter how small, must enter the formal change pathway and roll back or reassess the tweak based on impact analysis. In my opinion, this is the best option because prevents informal PO developer side agreements, ensures validation of business and technical impact, protects downstream processes, better than allowing unmanaged tweaks. Hidden changes often come from informal discussions. Formalizing all changes protects delivery integrity and reduces unexpected downstream impact. Question 323. QA reports that developers implemented a quick fix to handle a rare edge case. The change was not part of requirements or design. It now requires new regression tests. How should you manage this situation? Here's my answer and why. Investigate the quick fix, evaluate its impact, and integrate it into the requirement or change control process before allowing it to remain. In my opinion, this is the best option because ensures every change is traceable, prevents side effects from informal fixes, avoids growing regression scope unnoticed, better than accepting undocumented fixes. Quick fixes must be reviewed like any other change. Formalizing them protects quality and ensures the system behaves consistently. Question 324. Developers quietly consolidate two internal configuration files to simplify maintenance. This change was not communicated, and deployment scripts break during testing. How should you handle such hidden technical changes? Here's my answer and why. Review the consolidation decision with all affected technical stakeholders and integrate it into the technical baseline with proper documentation and approval. In my opinion, this is the best option because shows technical alignment, prevents deployment failures, makes hidden refactors visible and traceable, better than treating it as trivial refactoring. Even internal changes can have broad impact. Ensuring visibility and approval prevents environment breakages and aligns teams on technical baselines. Question 325. A stakeholder just adds one small field to a form during UAT by telling a developer directly. The field is implemented without impact checks. Later, data team flags inconsistencies. What do you do? Here's my answer and why. Pause the added field, follow impact analysis, data model, logic, reporting, and reintroduce it only through approved channels. In my opinion, this is the best option because prevents data inconsistencies, reinforces structured requirement changes, ensures alignment with downstream systems, better than allowing UAT-driven creep. UAT changes feel small but affect data flow significantly. A controlled impact assessment is necessary before accepting such additions. Question 326. A developer modifies logging logic to capture more details. This slows down performance in some workflows, but the developer argues it improves debugging long-term. No one was informed beforehand. How do you handle this? Here's my answer and why. Assess the logging change's impact, clarify logging standards, and ensure any modifications, debug or otherwise, go through formal review and approval. In my opinion, this is the best option because balances performance with maintainability, prevents hidden logging overhead, establishes governance for technical improvements, better than accepting informal tweaks. Even invisible changes like logging must be reviewed because they affect performance and behavior. Governance ensures balance between debugging needs and system performance. Question 327. While adding a new feature, a developer silently removes a rarely used configuration option because no one uses it anyway. A customer later reports the missing option. What's the best way to address this? Here's my answer and why. Restore or re-evaluate the removed option through proper requirement review, and reinforce that even deprecations must go through formal approval and communication. In my opinion, this is the best option because prevents unexpected customer impact, ensures all changes, including removals, are controlled, reinforces design and requirement traceability, better than unilateral developer decisions. Feature removals require the same scrutiny as additions. Customers rely on consistency, so approvals and communication are essential. Question 328. A junior developer simplifies an API response by removing two optional fields. Integrations begin failing in downstream systems. The developer believed the fields were unused. What is the best response? Here's my answer and why. Roll back or revise the API change, conduct impact analysis with downstream teams, and reinforce change control procedures for all API modifications. In my opinion, this is the best option because API contracts must never change silently, protects ecosystem stability, ensures downstream alignment, better than allowing assumptions to drive changes. API stability is critical. Hidden API modifications can cause cascading failures. Formal approval and coordination are mandatory. Question 3. While fixing a defect, a developer refactors part of the codebase, improving readability, but also altering logic subtly. QA reports new issues in unrelated areas. The developer considers this standard cleanup. How should you proceed? Here's my answer and why. Review the refactor, determine its impact, and formalize cleanup changes through approval channels so both defect fixes and refactors are tracked appropriately. In my opinion, this is the best option because ensures refactors do not introduce defects, prevents mixing refactor with production fixes without oversight, protects release stability. Better than leaving refactors undocumented. Refactors must be visible and reviewed because they can introduce subtle defects. Governance allows cleanup while maintaining release integrity. Question 330. During sprint review, you notice functionality that was not part of any user story or accepted requirement. The team added it because it was easy to implement once we were in the code. How should you respond? Here's my answer and why. Acknowledge the initiative, but clarify that even small enhancements must follow refinement and approval, and move the added functionality through official review before including it in the release. In my opinion, this is the best option because reinforces scope control without discouraging innovation, prevents hidden increments from slipping into production, ensures testing and acceptance criteria are applied, better than rewarding informal additions. Hidden changes often come from "it was easy" thinking. Encouraging innovation while enforcing change governance maintains discipline and quality. Question 331. You are leading a project with a fixed launch date. 3 major features are competing for priority, one demanded by sales, one by operations, and one by compliance. All 3 claim their feature is critical. The development team can deliver only one before the deadline. What is the best approach? Here's my answer and why. Facilitate a joint prioritization session using value, risk, and compliance impact to guide a shared decision on what should be delivered first. In my opinion, this is the best option because forces cross-functional alignment instead of isolated decisions, uses objective criteria to evaluate competing demands, ensures the team works on the highest value, lowest risk item, better than letting one stakeholder dominate the priority. Conflicting priorities require collaborative decision-making grounded in value and risk analysis. A joint prioritization meeting prevents political deadlock and aligns stakeholders on the final choice. Question 332. Your backlog contains 15 medium-sized features. The business owner wants all of them in the next release, but development capacity allows only 8. The business owner insists everything is equally important. How should you prioritize effectively? Here's my answer and why. Use a structured prioritization method, MOSCOW, WSJF, value versus effort, with the business owner to force differentiation between must-haves and lower priority items. In my opinion, this is the best option because converts everything is important into objective ranking, encourages trade-off thinking, aligns scope with actual capacity, better than letting the owner avoid prioritization. When stakeholders resist prioritization, structured frameworks help surface real differences and guide rational decision-making aligned with capacity. Question 333. Sales introduces a new high-visibility feature late in the cycle, demanding it be prioritized above all existing scope. Operations argues that an existing stability improvement is more critical. What should you do to resolve this scope priority conflict? Here's my answer and why. Bring sales and operations together to evaluate business impact, customer impact, risk, effort, and timing, and agree on priority using these shared criteria. In my opinion, this is the best option because creates shared ownership of the decision, avoids unilateral prioritization, ensures priority reflects holistic impact. Better than choosing one side. Balanced prioritization comes from evaluating all competing requests collaboratively. Shared criteria avoid emotional or department-driven decisions. Question 334. Two stakeholders agree that a feature is important but disagree strongly about when it should be delivered. Marketing wants it before a campaign, while engineering insists other technical debt items must come first. How do you align the priorities? Here's my answer and why. Organize a trade-off discussion mapping delivery sequencing options, risks of delaying tech debt, and the business impact of campaign timelines, enabling a mutually agreed decision. In my opinion, this is the best option because shows both sides the cost of delay, enables informed compromise, prevents siloed decision-making, better than allowing continued disagreement. Priority conflicts require visibility into both business timelines and technical risks. Trade-off discussions help stakeholders agree collaboratively. Question 335. The client asks for a set of quick enhancements. The team estimates them as small, but adding all of them will disrupt existing commitments. The client insists on including them because each enhancement is tiny. How do you prioritize correctly? Here's my answer and why. Show the combined impact of all enhancements on capacity and schedule, and negotiate with the client to prioritize which ones truly must be included now. In my opinion, this is the best option because shows that small items accumulate impact, facilitates realistic prioritization, protects commitments while keeping the client involved, better than treating requests individually. Small changes seem harmless individually, but cumulatively, they affect delivery. Transparent impact visualization helps clients prioritize rationally. Question 336. Leadership demands that a new innovation feature be prioritized immediately. However, a critical reliability fix is needed to prevent recurring outages. Both cannot be completed within the current sprint. How should you approach this? Here's my answer and why. Present the risks of delaying the reliability fix, compare them against the benefits of the innovation feature, and facilitate leadership in choosing the appropriate priority. In my opinion, this is the best option because converts competing demands into informed trade-offs, ensures leadership understands risk exposure, PM supports decision-making instead of dictating, better than unilaterally choosing one path. When reliability and innovation clash, leadership must choose based on clear risk-benefit visibility. PMs facilitate, not dictate, priority alignment. Question 337. Two stakeholder groups insist that their features are top priority. Each presents convincing arguments. Delivery capacity allows only one feature this quarter. Both groups refuse to compromise. What is your best approach? Here's my answer and why. Use a structured prioritization framework. Value, risk, cost, customer impact, and facilitate a joint decision session where both groups must align on a single choice. In my opinion, this is the best option because forces objective evaluation, reduces subjective conflict, produces a shared decision instead of imposed priority, better than letting one group dominate. When disagreements persist, structured frameworks depersonalize the debate and push stakeholders to align around shared objective criteria. Question 338. The business wants multiple enhancements for customer satisfaction. Engineering warns that these enhancements significantly increase performance load, risking system stability. How should you prioritize? Here's my answer and why. Discuss the performance risks with the business team, evaluate alternatives, and jointly determine which enhancements are safe to include now and which should be postponed or redesigned. In my opinion, this is the best option because aligns business goals with technical feasibility, encourages compromise grounded in risk, avoids blindly choosing between value and stability, better than unilateral decisions. Balancing customer value with technical stability requires open discussion and joint decisions based on risk appetite and feasibility, not unilateral action. Question 339. You discover a dependency that significantly increases effort for a highly requested feature. Business still wants it in the upcoming release. Engineering recommends deprioritizing due to excessive cost. How should you facilitate prioritization? Here's my answer and why. Present the updated effort, dependency impact, and alternative sequencing options, and guide stakeholders to reprioritize based on value versus cost. In my opinion, this is the best option because updates expectations with real constraints, supports value-driven prioritization, builds transparency and trust, better than hiding the complexity escalation it. Prioritization must evolve with new information. Stakeholders should make informed decisions based on updated cost-value dynamics. Question 340. A feature has high customer value but low revenue value. Another has moderate customer value but high revenue potential. Both teams insist their feature should be prioritized. How should you resolve this? Here's my answer and why. Facilitate a value analysis session comparing customer impact, revenue potential, strategic alignment, and delivery effort to help stakeholders jointly choose the higher overall value. In my opinion, this is the best option because balances different value dimensions, supports informed prioritization beyond single metrics, reduces emotionally charged debate, better than treating customer versus revenue as a binary choice. Multi-dimensional value conflicts require structured evaluation across revenue, customer impact, strategy, and effort. Facilitated alignment produces the most sustainable choice. Question 341. During a mid-release review, you discover that multiple user stories being developed are missing links to their original requirement documents. Developers say they used verbal clarifications instead. This makes it unclear whether the current work aligns with the approved scope baseline. What should you do? Here's my answer and why. Reconnect every active user story to the approved requirement source and enforce mandatory traceability to ensure all development aligns with the baseline. In my opinion, this is the best option because prevents accidental scope deviations, ensures requirements, stories, build traceability, reduces rework and misalignment risks, better than relying on verbal understanding. Ensuring each development item traces back to an approved requirement is foundational to scope control. Without documented traceability, scope drift becomes invisible. Question 342. A senior architect updates a technical workflow, claiming it's aligned with the original requirement intent. However, the workflow differs significantly from the scope baseline, and there is no documented approval. How do you handle this? Here's my answer and why. Compare the updated workflow against the baseline and initiate formal change control procedures, ensuring updated designs remain traceable to approved scope. In my opinion, this is the best option because ensures all design changes map to approved requirements, protects against unapproved scope shifts, maintains design requirement alignment, better than trusting interpretation. All design changes must map back to baseline scope. Even senior contributors must follow traceability and governance procedures to avoid hidden scope shifts. Question 343. A new stakeholder joins the project and claims several requirements were implicitly agreed earlier. These requirements were never documented or reflected in the scope baseline. They insist these items must be delivered. What should you do? Here's my answer and why. Request formal documentation of the new stakeholders' claims and evaluate them through the established change control process to maintain baseline integrity. In my opinion, this is the best option because prevents undocumented scope expansion, upholds formal approval pathways, ensures traceability from stakeholder requests to scope, better than accepting historical claims. Implicit requirements often cause uncontrolled expansion. Formalizing and assessing them protects the traceability and stability of the scope baseline. Question 344. Multiple UX screens have been updated by designers to match modern patterns. These updates were not part of any requirement changes. QA now reports mismatches between documented requirements and implemented screens. What is the best way to restore traceability? Here's my answer and why. Review all updated screens, map each change to baseline requirements, and submit deviations through change control for formal approval and documentation. In my opinion, this is the best option because reconnects UX output to requirement traceability, prevents silent UI-driven scope changes, ensures consistency between design, requirements, and QA, better than accepting unaligned UX updates. Design changes map traceability to approved requirements. Reviewing and submitting deviations prevents UI-driven scope drift. Question 345. Midway through the project, you find that some acceptance criteria were modified directly in the backlog without updated requirement references. The original stakeholder documents still show older criteria. What should you do? Here's my answer and why. Audit the modified acceptance criteria, validate changes with stakeholders, and update the baseline requirements to restore full traceability. In my opinion, this is the best option because ensures changes have stakeholder approval, keeps acceptance criteria consistent with requirements, fixes breaks in traceability, better than allowing backlog changes with outdated baselines. Acceptance criteria must trace back to approved requirements. Restoring alignment prevents future conflicts and ensures clarity for QA and development. Question 346. You notice that your scope baseline includes a set of performance requirements, but none of the related tasks or test cases reference these requirements. The team overlooked them. What is the best next step? Here's my answer and why. Integrate the performance requirements into user stories, tasks, and test cases, ensuring full alignment and traceability across delivery artifacts. In my opinion, this is the best option because reconnects overlooked baseline requirements, prevents gaps in coverage, improves completeness and quality, better than hoping they were implicitly considered PAM7. Performance requirements must be woven into tasks and test cases. End-to-end traceability ensures they don't become invisible or forgotten. Question 347. During integration testing, a feature fails because developers used a different interpretation of the requirement. The traceability matrix was not updated when clarifications were provided earlier. How should you correct this? Here's my answer and why. Update the traceability matrix to reflect the clarified requirement, realign story implementation, and ensure all parties use the corrected version. In my opinion, this is the best option because prevents repeated misinterpretation, ensures all teams operate from a single source of truth, repairs the broken traceability path, better than patching the symptom. Traceability matrices exist to prevent requirement misalignment. Updating them ensures everyone follows the same clarified requirement. Question 348. A new regulatory requirement must be added to the project. The team proposes adding it directly to the backlog and starting work. However, it does not yet appear in the official scope baseline. What is the correct action? Here's my answer and why. Update the scope baseline formally to include the regulatory requirement and then trace it into backlog items before development begins. In my opinion, this is the best option because ensures regulatory work is officially approved, maintains compliance traceability, prevents misalignment between baseline and execution, better than backlog-first execution. Compliance work must be reflected in the scope baseline before execution. Formalizing it ensures end-to-end traceability and auditable compliance. Question 349. Your project has several parallel workstreams. Each team maintains its own sub-backlog. You discover that the same requirement has been interpreted differently across teams, and there is no centralized traceability mechanism. What should you do next? Here's my answer and why. Create a unified traceability structure linking each team's backlog items back to the shared scope baseline to ensure consistent interpretation. In my opinion, this is the best option because prevents divergent implementations, ensures cross-team alignment, creates a single source of truth, better than decentralized traceability. Parallel teams require centralized traceability to prevent inconsistent interpretations. Unified linkage ensures synchronized scope execution. Question 350. Late in the project, an audit finds that several implemented features cannot be traced back to any approved requirement. The team claims these were logical extensions of existing features. What should you do immediately to repair scope traceability? Here's my answer and why. Document each extension, evaluate it through change control, and retroactively connect them to the baseline through formal approval. In my opinion, this is the best option because restores baseline integrity, allows legitimate extensions while controlling scope, ensures audit compliance. Better than removing or ignoring these features. Even legitimate extensions must be formally approved and connected to the scope baseline. Retroactive change control restores audit-ready traceability.